Hi, this is Lori Barnes. I'm here to talk to you about the Libra full moon that's coming up this week. It'll be Wednesday or Thursday, depending on where you live. If you're on the West Coast of the United States, it'll be at 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday. And if you're on the East Coast, it'll be just after midnight at 12:34 a.m. in the morning. And then if you're here in Rome, Italy, where I am, it'll be at 6:34 a.m. on Thursday. So Wednesday night on the West Coast, in the night, if you're on the East Coast, at 12:34 a.m. and then 6:34 a.m. in the morning in Rome. And this is the culmination. A full moon is the culmination when it's a full round circle in the sky. The culmination of this particular full moon is from the Aries new moon cycle. So it kicked off at the Aries new moon, which was on March 21st. Now we're culminating and we'll be halfway through the cycle. March was a really interesting month. We had some significant sign changes, and you may be feeling that right now. So that's one thing to look back on and reflect on. If you're experiencing the impact of Saturn moving into Pisces or Pluto moving into Aquarius, you are not alone. These were big, significant shifts. And the best way to understand it is to get a copy of your chart and find out where Pisces is in your chart, because that's what Saturn has moved into. And then look at where Aquarius is in your chart, because that's what Pluto moved into. So those are pretty important things in astrology. And Saturn will be there for 2.5 years, and Pluto will be in Aquarius for about 20 years, a little more than 20 years. So we have quite a bit of time to work with these energies. But we're here to talk about the full moon today and the full moon in Libra. So there's a couple of interesting things to note about the month of April in general. We have 2 new moons in Aries in a row, which doesn't happen that often. So we are in the middle of the Aries new moon from March 21st, and we're going to have another Aries new moon at the end of the month on April 20th. Now, the new moon in Aries on April the 20th is a solar eclipse. So we are going into eclipse season in April. We also have Mercury going into a retrograde. That happens about 3 times a year, around 3 times a year. Sometimes it overlaps a year and can be 4 times, but generally speaking, it's 3 times a year. And the shadow period that happens a few weeks before the actual retrograde is going to happen on April the 7th. So that's coming up real fast. And, just a day after this full moon culminates. So those are the other really important things happening in April, and in addition to our normal lunar phases. Let's talk about Libra full moon. I'm a Libra, so I'm excited because it's in my sign, or my sun sign, I should say, and my moon is in Aries. If you have a lot of Libra and Aries in your chart like I do, then this is a pretty activating full moon. The moon is in Libra, and Libra is about finding balance, mediation, appreciating beauty. Of course, we can't stay in balance all the time. So as a Libra, I always say I'm constantly trying to find balance. You cannot stay in balance all the time. That's unrealistic. I find it funny whenever I hear Libra being described as balanced, because what I find is that Libras are just constantly striving to find that balance, and maybe more aware of it or more interested in balance than other signs. That is part of the equation of this full moon, is the balance. And we have this energy coming up twice a year because, well, and with every pair of signs, right, you have the part of the year where it's focused, where it's sun, moon, and then the other part where it's moon, sun. So in this case, we have the sun is in Aries, and we had the new moon in Aries because both the sun and the moon were in Aries. And then we have the full moon when the moon is on the other side and it's in Libra. So that makes the full moon. And then when we go later in the year, we will have the sun in Libra, and then the new moon is when the moon and the sun are both in Libra. And when it's a full moon, the moon is on the other side in Aries. So we work with these energies, these 6 pairs of energies throughout the year. This pair of signs is interesting because Aries is about me. Aries is me focused, self-focused, and Libra is about you, is other focused, the other person. And so when we have these Libra Aries configurations, whether it's in April when we're in Aries season, which means the sun is traveling through Aries, or whether we're in October, September, October, when the sun is traveling through Libra, it brings up the same axis of these two signs, but one is going to be more about one sign and the other will be more about the other sign. So we are in April, we're talking about an Aries sun. It's a full moon, so it's a Libra moon. And it brings up that balance of me, self-focus, and you, other focus, things that you will want to ask yourself and evaluate in all of the different relationships in your life. So not just one relationship, but each relationship you have has a different balance to it. And that's what you want to consider. And you want to evaluate, how well am I maintaining balance in each particular relationship? Am I overly focused on myself? Am I overly focused on the other person? Or am I managing a pretty good balance, which means you're kind of like going back and forth, but more like this and not like this, where you're really imbalanced, or where you're kind of like always on one side or always on the other. Those are the questions to be asking yourself about your different relationships. It's really important not to be rigid about this, because there will be times in your life where you need to be more self-focused, and there'll be times when you need to be more other focused, and that's okay. When it's not okay is when you live in that extreme and there's no end in sight. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. For example, if you find that you're always focused on yourself and you don't take the time to cultivate relationships, to engage with your relationships, those relationships tend to drift away because you're not present. However, if you have something happening where you really have to focus on yourself, you're launching a new product, you're changing careers, you're writing a thesis for a degree that you're working on, starting a new job. There's lots of examples where you would want to be more self-focused. But after a period of time, you've worked through that and you come back to balance, and you come back to your partnerships, your friendships, your family, and you're able to spend the time with them that helps manage that relationship. But if you're always absent, that relationship is going to grow further and further away. So you want to think about that. The other side is to be overly focused on another person. And again, there are definitely times when you need to spend your focus and your time more on someone else, and maybe some of your own personal needs get put on the back burner for a little while. But that's not something that is manageable for an indefinite, long period of time. For example, if you have kids and your kids become sick, they catch something at school, and you have to stay home and you have to miss a day of work, maybe you have to miss a whole week of work. That's being really overly focused on someone else, but it's necessary and you have to do it. That's absolutely understandable. And, I definitely want to say, that's right, that's okay. Or your partner has a really crazy work schedule for 2 weeks and you have to do more grocery shopping and more cleaning and just more errands. That totally makes sense. That happens. That's normal. That's typical. But if it becomes where you're always having to give up your dreams, your passion, what you want to do with your time, and it's indefinite, it's going on for years, there's no end in sight, there's something wrong there, it's out of balance. And that's when you want to bring it back into balance. So those are the themes that are going to come up with an Aries and Libra focused new moon, full moon. In this case, we have the Libra full moon culminating. That is part of the cycle that started with the new moon in Aries on March 21st. And keeping in mind that we're going to have a second new moon in Aries on April the 20th. And it's going to be a solar eclipse. So that's going to make that new moon even more potent and more powerful. Eclipse season, these are really important periods of time that astrologers pay attention to when they happen during the year. I do want to make sure to say that not everyone feels that potent impact in their lives. Not everyone's chart is activated in the same way. If your chart is going to be activated, it's going to be close by degree to where the eclipse happens. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that in the next video, in the new moon video, which will be the beginning of the eclipse season. Eclipses always come in pairs, so we'll have the one at the new moon in April, and then we'll have one at the full moon in May. So I'll be talking more about that. But I just like to give you a heads up that eclipse season is coming, and we'll talk more about that in the next video. Mercury retrograde season is also coming, and it's coming very soon. The shadow is kicking off the day after this full moon, and the actual retrograde starts on the 21st. So what that means is that we still have a couple of weeks before we start getting into the mode of reflecting, refining, and realigning. We have a beautiful configuration with the sun and Jupiter, both being in Aries and very close. And of course, the moon is across the way in the sign of Libra. So there's an optimism or optimistic vibe to this full moon and a lot of energy. You know, Aries is a lot of energy. So as we're going into the Mercury retrograde, we have a few weeks left before we're in the retrograde. This is a good time to do that final push of anything new, any like new starts, new beginnings, things that you've kicked off because of the Aries new moon, or just things that are new in general, new phases that you've started on projects. So new projects or new phases. This has been a good time to push things forward, to start new things, going back to February when everything was direct and we had this forward momentum going. We had February and March to really push things forward. Now we're coming into the time where we can take a pause and look back and reflect on what you've done so far. I always like to look back to the previous Mercury retrograde, because between the two retrogrades is when it's like time to, you know, move forward and take action. It's the time to look back and catch where you need to, there's maybe some cracks in the foundation, something that's unfinished, undone, something you missed. And it's a good time to catch those things when they're small, instead of just going forward, and then not catching something until it becomes a really big problem. You know, when, you know, it falls apart or blows up. You could have probably caught those things much earlier if you went back and reflected and refined and realigned. And that is how to use Mercury retrograde in a really positive way, and not to be so scared of it, but to be more like, okay, cool, we're coming into a Mercury retrograde period. Yeah, there may be some delays, some communication breakdowns. It's not the best time to buy new technology unless you really, really have to. You know, if you need a new car, maybe wait. Unless you're, you know, getting it right now before the retrograde. But there's some really positive things. And it's like nature's way to say, hey, it's time to take a little pause and check all your work before you go and do more work. And that's the period of time we're coming into. The full moon has some other stuff happening at the same time as the moon is full. And it's always nice to know what those things are. It helps describe the vibes and the quality of the time. I already mentioned Jupiter will be there, and it's really lovely because it's really bringing that optimistic approach, and it combines with because of the sign that Jupiter and the sun are expressing through this Aries energy. There's a lot of assertiveness that you can bring into this, a lot of energy. And at the same time, with the moon in Libra, you want to be very considerate of others. So it's kind of like what we were talking about before, this self-focused and other-focused concept, that there's optimism and self-assertion and consideration for others combining together to make up this full moon. Speaking a little more on Libra, each sign has a spectrum of keywords or meanings to it. Just like all the planets, they have their energetic meanings, and how they are described has a spectrum, right? Can be very positive and also can be very challenging. So when we think about Libra, the positive description is trying to find that balance, the appreciation of beauty, the attempts to bring harmony into things. There's also a shadow side to the Libra expression, and that can be jealousy. There can be possession, there can be infidelity, because Libra is the sign of relationship, and it's one of the Venus signs, which is the planet that has to do with our relating style. So those are things to be aware of and to look out for. Not to say that's going to happen to you, because it's really going to be defined by your chart. So what we're talking about in these videos is always the general energy of the chart of the full moon. And unless it's combined with your personal chart, then we're not getting the personal kind of interpretation that we could with bringing in your chart. So if you have your chart, you definitely want to be looking at, where is Libra in my chart? Where is Aries in my chart? Do I have planets in either of those signs in my birth chart? Because that's what's going to be highly activated with this full moon. Aries. Aries is a Mars sign, and the way Aries is expressed is a lot of energy, like a can-do attitude, a warrior, a conqueror. It's someone who goes out and gets things done, never backs down from a challenge. I have an Aries moon. If you want to get me to do something, tell me that you don't think I can do it, because I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going to show you. That's very Aries-like energy. There's impulsivity. And so the shadow side can be, foot and mouth, acting before thinking, and immaturity, almost like a childlike way of doing things, temper tantrums. It's a fire sign, and very fiery, and Aries can blow up really fast, and then they're okay because they've blown up and let it out, but everybody else is still cringing from that Aries, like aggression. There's assertiveness and there's aggression. So positive expression of Aries is being assertive, and more negative expression is being aggressive. So those are our two signs for the full moon. I talked about how Jupiter is prominent, and that's really lovely. There's another planet that is somewhat prominent. This is actually fading away, but I still wanted to mention it because it's Mars, and Mars is the ruler of Aries. So that makes Mars very important in the full moon chart. And Mars is in the sign of Cancer, and Cancer is in a relationship with Libra and Aries in what we call square. It's like perpendicular, and it is square to both the sun and the moon, which is like an agitation. It's agitating these two, the sun and the moon, and these signs in a way that it wants to create growth and movement. That is the positive way to look at it. It can be irritating and annoying, like a thorn in your side, like you got to do something about it because it's uncomfortable. And through the process of doing something about it, you are growing and making things better. These squares, or a T-square, which means a square going in both directions, is positive in that it pushes change in some way. It can be perceived as annoying and negative in the moment because you have that thorn in your side going, hey, you got to change something. You know, when things are going really well and smooth, like what we see with trines and sextiles, there's not typically that motivation or agitation to make a change. So even though these squares have already happened because the sun and the moon are continuing to move forward and away from Mars, there is still that energy there that can mean that at the full moon, there's some agitation that is trying to push you into action. And you can fight it, you can not like it, you can curse and scream and throw a tantrum in the best Aries way, but also embrace it as in, well, what are you trying to tell me? This agitation that I feel, all right, let me open up to the message that maybe something needs to shift and change. And when I do that, the results are going to be something better is coming to me. So that would be something that I wanted to let you know, that Mars is active. We also have Mercury that's making quite a bit of contact with other planets at the time of the full moon. And they're all pretty positive interactions. So that's supportive. Of course, they're not making contact with the full moon, the sun and the moon, because Mercury is in Taurus. But I just wanted to say that it's like a layer of other energy that is operational at the same time as the full moon. There is one aspect, though, that Mercury is making that is challenging. So we have Mercury sextile Saturn, that's nice. That brings some grounding and some, realistic thinking to the picture. We have Mercury with the nodes, which means if you were starting something right now, there could be something that's more faded that has to do with the longer period of time. And we have Mercury sextile the Mars, which it helps with Mars, the energy of the agitation, that there's a nice angle between Mercury and Mars that's a little more soothing to this agitation. But then we have Mercury square Pluto, and that's like, whoa, that can feel like some sort of powerful change to our thinking, or a powerful challenge to thinking, like two different ways of thinking that are at odds, and that it creates some sort of tension, and something will have to be resolved out of that. It is a very quick passing energy. It's not going to last very long, but it is going to be active at the time of the full moon. And since full moons are culminations and they're full of energy, and we know the doctors and hospitals have told us over and over, they see a lot more activity on full moons, emotions run high. So with this agitation between Mercury and Pluto at the same time as the full moon, that, it can just be like things are a little more explosive at the full moon. And it is an Aries, Sun in Aries full moon. The moon is in Libra, but the sun is in Aries, and Jupiter is in Aries, and Mars rules the sign of Aries. So there's just a little bit of, well, little bit may not be the right word. There's just some underlying agitation, some underlying explosiveness. And with the signs Aries and Libra highlighted, there's this theme of being aware of, am I too introspective, too self-focused, too selfish is another word, or am I too other focused? Am I so involved in everyone else's business, so busy taking care of other people, that I have neglected to take care of myself? So all these themes are combining together as we come into the full moon. And I hope this helps you plan for your week and plan for the next few weeks as we go to the next new moon, and helps you remember to get things in order, to start preparing for transitioning from this fast, or not fast, well, a little fast moving, but forward moving is what I meant to say, with all the planets going forward, to the retrograde that we're going to be moving into, with Mercury going retrograde on April the 21st. I am going to leave you with a couple of inspirational quotes that have to do, at least for me, they reminded me of the energy of this full moon. And so here we go. The first one is from Confucius. Consideration for others is the basis of a good life, a good society. And that's important, that last part, a good society, because it relates to Pluto just moving into Aquarius. Capricorn, the sign Pluto was in before, is about top-down hierarchy, control from top down, like corporation, CEO down, president down. Aquarius is about the masses and the people and the power to the people. And so I thought that was a nice tie-in. Next one is from Willie Nelson, country music star. He says, what goes around comes around. Now, I don't know if he originally said that, because that's a pretty well-known cliche, but I like it because it has to do with that karma, and it has to do with how we treat other people, which is a huge theme of any Aries Libra moon configuration. The next one is from Mary Kay Ash, who says, real strength entails being considerate and supportive of people's feelings. And the last one is from Mary McCarthy, who says, life is a system of recurrent pairs, the poison and the antidote being eternally packaged together by some considerate heavenly druggist, which is kind of a reference to the stars in astrology and the concept of polarity. The Aries Libra axis that we've talked about today, that just really coincided with this quote. So I wanted to share that with you. I hope you have a fantastic Libra full moon. I will be back in a couple of weeks with the next video to talk about this very interesting upcoming configuration, new moon, second new moon in Aries, Mercury going retrograde, and the solar eclipse, which is going to kick off the eclipse season that we have in April and May. Have a great full moon. Ciao.